g'day and welcome to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast. We are so glad that you would join us this fortnight for another episode as we hear from leaders from around the globe, as well as here in our backyard when it comes to multiplication and church planting. And as we've thrown ourselves into the start of this year, 2023, already heard from Dave Ferguson a number of weeks ago, wanting to kind of be thinking about some of the great events that Exponential also has coming up on offer for you. And so just as a reminder, if you haven't already, jump on our website. We'd love you to join us at our March regional events on the east coast of Australia. But today we are joined by a guest, a good friend of mine. We met a number of years ago, and I loved spending that time with him. And we are joined today by Ger Jones. Ger is the lead pastor of Vintage Church in LA. I'll let him tell us a bit more about Vintage Church. But Ger, it's wonderful that you would join us today all the way from LA via Zoom.
May, it's fantastic. Real honor to be here. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Now, maybe first to start off with, can you just explain some of the origins of your name? I don't think many Aussies would have kind of come across your name before. Tell us about your name.
Yeah, no, my name is Ger Jones. Its full name is Geraint Jones, a very Welsh name. My dad was Welsh, so he blessed or burdened, depending on how you see my name, with one of the Welsh heritage. But Ger is the unfortunate short version of that. Although all my mates in Australia have lots of other more colourful nicknames for me than that.
That's not like Australians to do that.
They're unrepeatable on this podcast.
That's right. Well, hey, obviously people would have just picked up on the fact that you have a British accent, that you have a Welsh heritage by the sounds of things. Yet, as I just mentioned in our introduction, you find yourself in LA. I wonder, before we kind of get to kind of hearing more of the story of Vintage Church and how you've been able to plant and lead Vintage Church over the last 11 years, you would just tell us about some of your, I guess, journey with Jesus and step into ministry and where you've come from that has led you to where you are now.
Yeah, mate, I'll keep it brief because there's just, like all of our stories, some pretty significant moments. But over the years, really the highlights are raised in a church planter's home. My dad was a church planter in England, part of the UK charismatic house church movement. I went after uni, I went to be in business and law for about 10 years in London and a bit overseas. In London, kind of met my wife, who is an Aussie. She was working there. Lizzie, she's from Sydney. But really all that time when I was at HDB, I was coming back to faith a bit. I'd lost my faith in my early 20s, fell out of love with the church significantly. And it was really going to this church called Holy Trinity Brompton in London and the Alpha course, which really brought me back into faith, brought me back into belief once again in church, brought me back into a belief in having a thinking faith, not just an experiential, charismatic faith, and really loved the both. And I just thought that was it. I just thought, great, the rest of my life, I'm going to be helping my friends find Jesus by bringing them across London to the Alpha course.
Wow.
And after a while, I kept on being pressurized into maybe to think about becoming a pastor. Resisted it like mad, felt there was nothing more intoxicating and privileged than being a minister in the marketplace. And I didn't want to be around Christians all day long. I loved being in the marketplace. But after a while, different story, God broke through, kind of said, I want you to lay down your career and go into ministry and really help and equip the church to send out ministers into the marketplace, not only to renew the marketplace and the vocations in which we work, but also see people effectively reach for Jesus in this cultural moment, which is a very different moment to maybe what people are used to in the 70s and 80s and before. So long story short, went to seminary. I went to a seminary in Vancouver called Regent College in Vancouver. We were going to go back to London to work in the HDB network of churches, part of a church plant there. But we were asked to go help a church in Raleigh, North Carolina. Never thought we'd end up in America. Weren't looking for that. But we went to there, helped that church out with kind of some renewal in the spirit, and also Alpha. We were then going to go back to London, but one of the members of our denomination said, "Hey, would you consider planting a church like HTB, but would you do that in Los Angeles?"
Wow.
And it wasn't on our radar. We had no desire to go to LA.
Okay, where did that come from? Was that a prompting of the Holy Spirit through this person? Was there some rationale to that?
Yeah, mate. Well, Lizzie and I were discerning what's our next step. We'd been in Raleigh for 4 years, lovely little church, and we didn't think that was our end destination. So we were exploring what's next. And Lizzie and I mean, the story is we felt God say, "Stay in America." We said, "Okay, well, where do we go?" We got the map out of America with a Sharpie, and we're circling cities that we just thought, you know what? I don't know, maybe there. And we went. My wife's from Sydney, loves the beach, and actually really loves to see the ocean. So I said, "Look, let's try and find a place with water."
Wow.
So we looked down the East Coast, and then we looked down the West Coast, and we came to LA, and we just put a big X through LA. And my wife's famous words were, "I'll never live in Los Angeles." The next day, the bishop, I'm part of the Anglican Church, and the bishop called and said, "Yeah, I've just had an opportunity. Someone wants to see an HTB type of church in LA. And all I can think of is I think the Spirit's prompting me again and again that you're the guy to do that."
Wow.
And it wasn't actually very appealing. It wasn't very attractive. He said there's no money. There's really no people. But there's one person who's like a student in the city who reached out to me and said, "It'd be great to have an HTB Alpha type church in LA." And so, are you up for it? And over a long period of discernment and prayer, we felt God say yes. And that was such a surprise.
Wow.
And so we planted this church from scratch. It's bizarre. I had to fly into LA every couple of weeks, spent about 6 days in Los Angeles, and then flew home for 3 days just to try and cultivate people, resources, to get this thing going. And then after that kind of commuting for about 6 months back and forward from LA, we then moved out as a family in January 2011. And we launched Easter Sunday 2011 in a little movie theater in Westwood, Los Angeles, in the shadow of UCLA, with a really exciting opening congregation number of about 16 people, which was huge at the time because we didn't know anyone. So it felt like, wow, we've got 16. And most of those 16 were there just to encourage us not to stick around. So that's how we ended up here.
Well, Ger, and hey, I think you've just fast forwarded a whole bunch of stuff, of course, for the sake of brevity and our time together. Sure. But I'd love to kind of rewind a little bit, particularly, and I didn't know that part of your story, that for 6 months you were flying in, flying out. You know, as you said before, you had no pre-existing relationships in LA. Like it really was something of a parachute into a brand new city in a new country. I would just want to ask, like, how did you start? Like where was the start point for you? How did you begin to connect with people, build relationships? Of course, we're going to get to a bit of some of your journey with Alpha, but I would just kind of want to go, where do you start in one of the world's most sprawling cities that is kind of so spread apart? I'm just baffled. How did you start that journey?
Well, you got to start with the call of God that he wants you there, because it's ridiculously difficult to start a new church. And if you don't have the call that you're pursuing through obedience, not just passion, you'll never do it. So I just want to just say that call was very clear for me. I flew in one weekend just to kind of pray around the city and walked around the city. And as I was landing down at LAX, I felt God said, look, as you get off this plane, don't look at the palm trees and the surf. Look at the idols of the city. A bit of when Paul walked around Ephesus and saw the great idols of the city, and Athens and other places, all these cities full of idols. And ultimately, I walked around LA and my heart broke for the city. There was a real sense of pain And in Acts chapter 16, that Paul has that vision of a man from Macedonia begging for help. And he's so stirred with compassion for this man. He says, immediately we concluded we had to go and preach the gospel to these people. And I felt a hostage to the cry of the lost of this amazing city.
Wow.
I didn't come because it was an opportunity. I didn't come because we had nowhere else to go, far from it. I didn't come because it was kind of the cool, sexy thing to do. LA is a hard, expensive, concrete, lonely, superficial in many ways, transient city. It's not a place where lots of people decide this is going to be a great place to come. And so, but we felt the hostage of the lost, to the call of the lost. And so that's when, okay, well, what do we do? Thankfully, I knew enough to do a couple of things. Number one was learn everything about church planting I could. So for 6 months, I read every book out there. I listened to every kind of lecture on church planting I could. And I stumbled across a seminar from a conference that I downloaded for free on the website on how to plant a church in a city where you don't know anyone.
Wow.
I literally found this seminar called How to Plant a Church in a City Where You Don't Know.
Who gave that seminar out of interest, Ger?
You know what? It was the old Acts.29 network with Mark Driscoll and a few of his buddies.
Okay.
And it wasn't Mark Driscoll, it was two other guys. And they were church planting like mad. So they seemed to have all the expertise around church planting. And so I was listening to this, and it was this roadmap of what I needed to do. And they based their learnings on a secular seminar by one of Bill Clinton's fundraisers on how to raise money in a city where you don't know anyone. And they had retooled it to how to plant a church using the same methodology and strategy. So I just adopted that wholesale. I thought, great. And so over the next 6 months, I implemented that strategy. And I also implemented that strategy together with the faith that if God was calling me to that city, he had already prepared people there on the ground to help me. I tried to bring about 10 people from the church in Raleigh to help plant the church with me, but that didn't work. So at the end, it was just me and my family moved out. But we had a strong sense of conviction that God was in it, and therefore faith that he's going to turn up and do something. So we did have a great, I think, season of grace in our lives that we're going into something which other people feel is pretty crazy, maybe unwise, but we had such a conviction that God was in this, and coupled with wisdom and strategy of what to do, that we then said, great. And then over the next few months, we just saw God unfold divine appointments, unfold little mini miracles of provision that we could actually get and start to see something grow.
Wow. And so really from the get-go, it was very life on life, connecting with the barista, looking for opportunities to create relationships in the part of LA that you were in, I imagine.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. I think a great friend of mine advised, look, and it was actually the church planting director of the Vineyard movement in America. He said, look, don't use your time very wisely. Try and find the 150 to 100 to 150 Christians in your city that want to help you plant this church. And my passion was, hey, if I find them, that immediately gets us to a place of sustainability that together we can reach the city. But if I don't find them and focus on just the one or twos who maybe they're not Christians and do like micro evangelism, then our church is going to die before they come to know Jesus. So the strategy was spend all my time initially finding the 100 to 150 people who God is really coalescing around me and together to be the team.
Wow.
And then we can have a sustainable church to reach out and see the city come to Jesus. So that was the strategy. It wasn't so much to pick up individuals who were maybe seeking, but it was actually trying to find, God, who are the people who you've already planted the vision, that I need to find them. And so my strategy that was to have 6 coffees a day with anybody who would have coffee with me
Yeah.
just to share the vision, understand the city, and then eventually through them or friends of theirs, find people who were having a burden for this expression of the kingdom that we were hoping to plant.
Wow. And how was your coffee intake in that season?
Dude, I think I'm still jittery. I don't think I'm fully detoxed.
Ah, that's great.
I literally, Starbucks was the name of the game back then. I still get triggered every time I go into a Starbucks.
Hey, Ger, I just felt prompted to ask. Obviously, that's a huge upheaval for your family as well, and particularly having kids in that stage of life that they would have been in. How did that weigh upon your family as you relocated to a new city and kind of started to really do life in a completely new place?
Yeah, so you know what, Charlie, that was a big part of our move out here because although Lizzie and I felt God's call, we also had 3 kids who were 2, 6, and 8. Wow. No, 2, 6, and 7. And we were in a pretty, I would say, comfortable and safe environment in Raleigh, a really beautiful, smaller city in America. And we really did not know, God, what are you doing calling us? Are our kids going to be safe?
Yeah.
We were there praying about that. And I got to say, we were carrying some fear. And we went to a conference. And at this conference, we didn't know many people, but this guy came up to us. And I'm a kind of charismatic, but I'm also a cautious charismatic. People have tried to push me over way too many times, and it's just like, I believe in it. Believe in the power of God. I've seen miracles and I absolutely passionately believe in that. But this guy at this conference came up to me and said, excuse me, it's just, sorry to interrupt you, but you don't know who I am. But as we were worshiping, you caught my eye. And I believe God gave me a prophetic word for you. And I went, okay, sure. We'll weigh that. And he was very humble about it. He wasn't very pushy about it. But mate, he rocked our world, or God did really, with this guy just said, look, I really believe you're about to make a big move and you're worried about your kids. You're worried about how they're going to do in this new place. He actually got very specific. One of those prophecies where you go, oh my word, that's too specific.
Yeah.
And he knew things about our kids that were very personal. But he said, look, I think God's giving me this information, this detail, just so you would have the absolute rock solid faith.
Wow.
That God is in this. That you need to know that it's not just a nice word, but God's giving some specificity around this. So you can always look back at this moment and go, oh no, this is from God. Wow. And so the key message was, which is in line with the scripture, right? In line with the biblical truth, which all prophecy needs to be, was simply, God is not just calling you as parents to the city, he's calling your kids. Because he's got great things for them in the city.
Wow.
And their best future in Christ is going to be by coming to the city of Los Angeles. Oh, he didn't say LA, he didn't know where we were moving.
Yeah.
And so we really hung on to that. And I got to say, there's been some pretty dark times, but we've hung on to that and we've seen God be very faithful with caring for our kids and particularly seeing them grow in Christ. It was coupled with the fact that Tim Keller, who we all know and love, wrote an article years ago on, I think it was like 9 reasons why raising your kids in the city is better than raising them in the suburbs.
Wow.
And that was mind-blowing when we read that. It was, oh, you know what? He's right, actually. And in the American context, it felt like, oh, this, in line with that prophecy, this could be better for our kids spiritually.
Yeah.
And we found that to be true. We've got, our kids have got their own journey, their own faith, and I'm sure they'll have a lot of things to work out, but they're oriented towards Jesus and to 18, 19 in a very secular, progressive, aggressively progressive city of LA. They are following Jesus, and we just praise God for that.
Absolutely, mate. We join you with that. Hey, you made comment before about that strategy that you employed around, trying to connect with, coalesce, rally 100 to 150 followers of Jesus that were favorable towards you and the mission of Vintage Church in LA. And of course, a big part of who you are as a leader, people who, would have connected with you, heard of some of your ministry, know that Alpha is a very integral part to who you are and to Vintage. And it's been one of the primary strategies that you have employed by way of planting a church in LA that is now 2 locations. Yeah.
3 and about to go 4.
Wow. So 4 locations. You have kind of, at least from an outsider's perspective, taken Alpha to a whole new level. You've done things like launch parties that I'd love you to share about. You've just seen Alpha as a way that can engage the questions that people have. And you've been able to rally a church to be able to not just get around that, but to kind of make it, I guess, the heart and soul of what you do in terms of reaching people. I wonder if you just take, a couple of minutes to talk us through your Alpha journey. Obviously, it's been a key part of your coming to know the Lord, marketplace ministry. Just speak to us about how you've been able to employ that in church planting.
Yeah, mate, we knew we needed some help to turn what I would say is generally a cultural moment where Christians are facing inward. We needed something to help them turn outward.
Yeah.
Particularly with church planting. When you plant a church, most people come to the church because they're looking for a fresh expression of church. They're normally saying, I feel called to this church, and in the most healthiest way, I'm being sent out. Maybe God's replanting me from one church to the other. But there's normally reasons. It's because, hey, I'm liking the teaching, or I like the worship, or the kids' ministry feels more suitable for us as a family. It's never because these people know how to reach the lost, and I can't wait to do that. It's always, this church is offering something for me and my family spiritually, which we feel is right for us in this season. So if you're not careful, you're gathering together, by definition, introspective and introverted Christians.
Yeah.
With mission, which isn't in the heart of things. And so we knew we needed to do that to build sustainability, we needed Christians to give, to serve, to be on teams, to be community group leaders. But if we're not careful, we're actually more turned in on ourselves than existing churches, which is why I realized, church planting doesn't necessarily mean you're going to reach more non-Christians.
Yeah.
If you're not careful, you're going to be more insular than other churches that have been around for a while. So we needed something to help create an outward-looking community. And that couldn't be preaching on a Sunday necessarily, because people were coming because they didn't want evangelistic sermons. They wanted to be fed, right? And so we found Alpha to be the really perfect tool for this. It was, the church is still going to provide everything that you love it to be for your kids, teaching. And I say to people generally, people are looking for more, they want to be better teaching, better spiritual formation, or better charismatic stuff. Generally, people are looking right now for one of those 3 things, or all 3 if you're really picky. And we thought, well, we don't want to bait and switch people and suddenly go, we're just going to reach the lost on Sundays, bring your friends. How do we feed Christians and orient them outside to the lost? And for me, that meant actually allowing Sundays to still be the place of discipleship, to still be the place of helping people be fed, but midweek, orient a different outward perspective through Alpha and say to all of you, all of the folks in our church, bring your friends to this and see the power of something like the Alpha course to see your friends come to Jesus. And people actually bought into it because we found people genuinely fearful of evangelism. That was either because they were reacting to the extremes of the seeker-sensitive movement, or they were reacting to old methodologies of reaching the lost, which were now kind of ineffective, inappropriate, or just frankly embarrassing in today's multicultural secular context.
Yeah.
People did, and also, we're in a minority now, and people feel the pressure of, am I going to lose my job if I share my faith? Am I going to lose my friends? Am I going to come across as intolerant? So evangelism was a very deeply unpopular subject what Alpha did, it recalibrated evangelism sensitively, because it said, we too agree with you with all of these challenges, but here is a way to do evangelism that isn't culturally insensitive, that actually doesn't lose your friends, that actually this is a way that moves people away from target moment evangelistic crusades, as they used to be called, to a loving conversational journey that people will enjoy. And it was retooling evangelism in a way that I think people can go, man, I've always wanted my husband to come to know Jesus. Man, I've always wanted my son to investigate Jesus. Oh man, I always wanted my colleague to maybe look into it. But I had no methodology and no way practically of making that happen. And Alpha was a gift to people because it was like, we don't have to turn seeker sensitive. I don't have to be one of those embarrassing Jesus freaks. I can simply invite people to a really cool Wednesday night dinner. And it's effective. And actually, I say to people, what you'll find is the people you invite, you will grow in your relationship with them, not lose your relationship with them.
That's great.
So I think Alpha's a great gift to an evangelistically cautious community like America is, living in a post-secular, progressive context. Is a real gift because it seems to fit the cultural moment of how we share our faith.
Amazing. And you know, when you first shared about this, when I was part of a gathering where you shared about this concept of the launch party, like, tell us about that, because I think that's something that will, you know, really compel and intrigue people around putting on a party that might be a space where people would kind of come and dispel some of their misconceptions around Christianity or faith.
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, that Alpha needs to be incarnational, right? And so Jesus went to people. He didn't say, hey, I'm going to hold a meeting for all you inquirers at the local temple. He said he walked the streets and went to their homes, and we need to go to them. And so that's why Alpha is so powerful, because we can do it in homes, we can do it in pubs, we can do it wherever. Now, we have a big church building, which we said we've got to somehow utilize this. And so we do two things. First of all, we make our building incarnationally a neutral third space as possible. So people come in and there is no Christian bling anywhere, right? You know, we tear down all of their posters. We don't have anything that makes it look like they're coming into our territory.
Yeah.
And so we make the whole place look like a third space that some secular organization called Alpha, or not secular, but an organization called Alpha has rented this building.
Yeah, okay.
So we kit out the courtyard to be like a pub environment. You know, it's great. But then secondly, we have a launch night because most people don't want to commit to anything. Most people kind of are confused about what Alpha is. So what we set up immediately before Alpha starts, we have an Alpha launch party where basically if you bring your friends to that, it's a party. You got a live band. We're going to have the Alpha pub open. We're going to have just a great atmosphere. We're going to showcase some social justice charities that people can kind of get involved with. And then I'm going to, at some point of the evening, give a bit of a plug for Alpha.
Yeah.
And you're going to be in groups that you meet people that if you come back the next week, you're still going to be with these people, so you can connect with the people and kind of go, hey, I like these people. But what we found is that Alpha launch night was needed for the rest of the church to get confidence to bring their colleagues, their neighbors, because it was a one-off evening, which was great fun and a real low barrier for people to bring friends. And then even if what we found is, I'm a bit of a data-driven guy, you know, we found that we retain 75% of guests who come to that evening, who then come next week to the actual Alpha course proper. And even the 25% who don't come back, man, we're so excited because they now know where to go if the big questions of life starts to stir in them. And what we found is lots of people maybe come to launch night, love the environment, will say something like, man, we've never met Christians like this before, you know? And even if they don't want to come now, what we find is life eventually hits them between the legs and they go, we need to search for better answers. And they come to the next one.
Yeah.
So we kind of want to encourage all of our church to bring all their friends, but they needed that low bar event to do that. Because frankly, we found we had a marketing issue, a sales issue. Most non-Christians with their colleagues or friends don't know how to pitch Alpha.
Yeah.
They just don't know what to say. It's a course, but it's you don't have to commit. It's about Jesus, but it's not really about Jesus because it's exploring the big questions of life. But all the talks are about Jesus. It's confusing for people to give like a 20-second pitch.
Yeah.
So we give them a really easy pitch, which is the Alpha launch night.
Awesome.
And we found that very compelling. Non-Christians don't mind coming to a launch night if it's a good party.
Absolutely. Yeah, so good, Ger. Hey, and how can people find out more, particularly around Alpha? Like we were speaking off air that there's a chance that you might be coming to Australia later this year.
Yeah, mate, I'll be, there's nothing I love more than helping churches discover or rediscover Alpha and sometimes like retool it to work in a urban, secular, younger context. Yeah. And so we run masterclasses here in LA. We're going to run masterclasses online where I just share everything we've learned. And I'm going to come out and work with Alpha Australia in the summer, in my summer, probably your winter, in July, late July. And I think we're going around Brisbane, Melbourne, and Sydney and doing some kind of events where, man, we just want to share what we've learned. And our Alpha grew from 3 people to, our latest Alpha's got like 200 to 300 people on it. So amazing. We think it's such a beautiful gift for a generation of people that are questioning or re-questioning.
Yeah.
And particularly I would say to people in the context of, man, even all of our own people are deconstructing their faith right now. Well, Alpha is the best space for people to constructively deconstruct and find Jesus in the process of healthy deconstruction.
Wow.
And so it's a real gift, mate.
Awesome. So I just want to very much encourage anyone who's listening today, go and connect with our friends at Alpha Australia. That would be a great thing for you to go and be a part of and hear from Ger again as he shares more deeply around that. The last question I wanted to ask today, Ger, was particularly around, I guess, the soul of your leadership. And I remember when we first spent some time together, we were driving around the countryside. We were just kind of sharing reflections on life and ministry. And you said something that really stood out to me and kind of has been a reminder for me in my ministry and walk with the Lord, is for kind of every book that you read that's kind of encouraging you to take the hill and kind of make an impact on the world, which is all good and great. And Jesus obviously gives us the Great Commission to go and do great things in his name. But you also said that for every one of those books, you kind of need to read 10 that really tenderly speak of the love of Jesus for your own soul as a leader and what it means to stay in deep communion with God. And you spoke of authors like Henry Nouwen and Brennan Manning and, some of those greats. I just wonder what, 11 years into what has been, particularly in the last couple of years in the US being a different context, vaccines, COVID, race, all those kind of, big ticket things that have had the potential to take you out of ministry and loving the Lord. What have been some of the things that have kept you where the Lord wants you, in deep communion with him, loving him more every day, loving your wife and your kids more every day? What have been some of the kind of simple practices that have been able to help feed the soul of your leadership?
Well, mate, if there's one thing I've learned over the last 12 years, it's we have to give constant attention to our soul. And there's nothing like Christian leadership, and particularly church planting, to put stress like nothing else on your soul. And if you're not tending to it, if you're not nourishing it in Christ, if you're not caring for it, then eventually you'll act out. And you'll either act out in legal ways, you'll overeat, you'll overdrink, you'll get angry, or you'll kind of act out in inappropriate ways. You'll have an affair, you'll turn to too much alcohol, or you'll do some crazy stuff, because nothing like church leadership is going to put pressure on your soul. And I say, someone who I was I was a lawyer, a corporate lawyer. I worked 80-hour weeks for 6 years in London, and I ran a business for a while, a brand and a big business, which was pretty intense. So I was pretty hectic in that environment, but the stress is nothing like what it is to be a pastor.
Wow.
And so I do think an acknowledgement of, okay, this is important for me to care for my soul. So I put rhythms in place, and particularly COVID exposed, I need to put deeper rhythms in place where I tend to my soul. And so Lizzie and I, my wife and I, have enjoyed both kind of structural infrastructures of rule of life and trying to my best to kind of work out what that means for me as an extrovert activist, but also emotionally healthy discipleship resources from the Scazzarros. We've done a lot of that stuff. I see a therapist once a month as part of my, hey, I'm just going to put that in there. Yeah. And so I have someone confidential I can talk to about anything with once a month, who's a wonderful Christian trained therapist. And then I make sure in the mornings that I'm reading. It's funny, I've got three options. I walk every morning with my dogs, and I carry a backpack and try and get an exercise in it. But I carry three things in my backpack. I find a bench, and in my backpack, the three things: my Bible, my journal, and some kind of devotional soul care book. Mm. And frankly, depending on the morning, I'll just maybe read the Bible, or I'll just journal if I'm feeling I need to get my emotions out. But the soul care book is crucial. It feels like I have a personal mentor just go into the places that no one else goes to and examine my motives, examine why I'm angry, examine why I want to kill one of my elders. And it's one of those things where I need to, John 15, I have to stay connected to the vine. Wow. And I'm a performance-oriented guy, which I'm kind of working my way through. I'm an activist. And so if I'm not careful, I can live out of my vision. I can live out of my desire to succeed. I can live out of my passion to see people lost. But that should never be the source of why we're doing anything. It's simply we're at rest in who we are in Christ. And that's been so important for me, particularly because I know that I need that the most, because I'm going to run off in a different direction if I'm not careful. So Ruth Haley Barton is the book I'm reading right now, and it's nailing me every paragraph. It's going to take me a year to get through it, because every paragraph is exposing a deeper layer of idolatry in my heart that needs to be rectified. And I want to get to the place where even when, you are kind of attacked, you put yourself in leadership, you're going to make choices which disappoint people. Yeah. And then you're going to make mistakes, which as a leader, when you make mistakes on people, and that's sad because then they get hurt. And so I want to be at a place where I look at Christ, who was on the cross, and he looked down at people who were nailing him to the cross. And he said, Father, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing. And that twin passion of people, Lord, I want to deeply love people, but also deeply resonate that we're all so broken that we're going to hurt each other. And how can we live with those two twin deep theological truths of deeply loved by the Father and more broken than we could even imagine? That how does that support my own leadership, that I don't beat myself up when I do something wrong, but plead the grace of Christ and ask for forgiveness? But equally, how do I extend that grace to those I'm leading as well? And so anyway, you can see me just processing verbally here, mate. It's the kind of thing where I go, in my heart, I need to stay close to Jesus, rhythms of life, mentors, and ultimately, I have a pretty strong ecosystem around my life to keep my soul rooted and constantly feeding and being opened up by the Spirit of God.
Beautiful. Well, Ger, you're an absolute gift, both in terms of your missional intent and courage and obedience to what God has led you in, but equally in your interior life. So just wanted to say a huge thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to connecting with you in Australia soon.
Mate, it's such a pleasure, and there's nothing more that my wife and I want to do than come and visit and come and say hi to you all.
Awesome. Bless you, Ger.
Bless you, mate.